From an article written by Vicious Syndicate on the new decks of Hearthstone's newest expansion, United in Stormwind. Win rates are generally inflated because bad decks such as Garrote Rogue are still common and give out easy wins to almost everyone. Garrote Rogue looks like a pretty bad deck. We don't see a deck that's mired by experimentation, and there's no build out there that solved the archetype's alarming weaknesses. Not recommended. After this post was written, there would be multiple nerfs to this strategy. The deck would be brought by 7 of the top 8 players at the 2021 Hearthstone World Championship. It would win said World Championship and fundamentally challenge our ideas of what a game of Hearthstone was. What made this card so good? Well, let's get basic. The goal of Hearthstone is to reduce your opponent's health from 30 to 0. The way most decks in the history of Hearthstone have approached this is to summon minions, engage in a long back and forth fighting these minions, and steadily make incremental progress against your opponent's health total. Garrote Rogue went against tradition by ignoring minions instead of fighting with them and taking out all your opponent's health in one big move instead of little by little. Not the first of its kind, Garrote Rogue was actually released amongst a slew of other combo decks that drew the ire of traditional Hearthstone fans for massively quickening the pace of the game and subverting the normal aspects of Hearthstone matches. These critics forecasted a winter where combo v combo matches were the main type of Hearthstone game, and conventional, slow procedural matches would become the outliers. Were these prognostications true? Well, let's dive into the history of Garrote Rogue and judge for ourselves. So what's the big idea of the deck, and why did people think it would stink? Garrote is a 2-mana rogue spell that deals 2 damage to the enemy hero. It then shuffles 3 bleed spells into your deck that cast when they're drawn and also deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. So for 2 mana, you're doing 2 right now up to a total of 8. A card like Sinister Strike is 1 mana and does more damage immediately, and that card is mediocre. So you're paying more mana for less immediate damage. Now sure, you could draw into the bleeds later, but if you wait to draw these cards, the opponent will have enough time to heal themselves, summon minions, or just kill you. Views of this card were also negatively skewed following the flops of similar style cards like Ticketmaster that also shuffled cards into the deck, so players were skeptical about the new iteration of the same shuffle effect. Alright, so I think I've explained why people initially thought this card was bad, but what did they miss? Well, they missed this. Oh, that's just an image saying to subscrundo to Chunda. Interesting. Never thought about it like that. Well, anyway. Hearthstone has a mechanic called spell damage where certain cards will increase the damage of your spells. Well, spell damage effects get applied to the bleeds that get shuffled into your deck. So that means while having spell damage plus 2 will make your Sinister Strike do 5 damage instead of 3, your Garrote will now do a maximum of 16 damage instead of 8. That means that if you play 2 Garrotes with spell damage plus 2 and then draw all the bleeds, you deal 32 direct damage to your opponent and win the game. Now wait, that's a pretty big if. How are you going to draw all the bleeds? You'd have to draw your entire deck. How are you going to do that?
Where's my auctioneer? Oh my god! I just got an auctioneer!
A card that has caused problems in the game since its inception, Gadgetzan Auctioneer is a 6-mana 4/4 minion that allows you to draw a card every time you cast a spell. Popular in Miracle Rogue variants from the past, Gadgetzan Auctioneer is one piece of the puzzle that will let you draw enough cards to enable Garrote. But you need to get enough spells to pair with it to draw through your deck. Who can do that? Well, bear with me because things are about to get weird. Released in the same set as Garrote, Lone Shark is a 3-mana 3/4 with Battle Cry, give your opponent a coin, Death Rattle, you get 2. Coins are 0-mana spells that give you 1 mana this turn. Combined with cards like Sketchy Information, you could draw this card and trigger its Death Rattle very consistently. The last piece of the puzzle was the spell damage. Usually spell damage had been pretty hard to get due to its potency, and it required cards that sat in your hand most of the time, doing nothing since you had to wait until your combo turn to play them. However, United in Stormwind released a series of utility cards with the tradable keyword. Tradable cards could be shuffled back into the deck for 1 mana in order to draw a card. With this, Guild Trader would no longer just sit in your hand and you could just shuffle it away if you didn't need it right now. And now, with all these pieces together, the deck was bad. Like, really bad. Like, 38% win rate bad. Time had not been kind to Gadgets and Auctioneer. When one of your combo pieces costs 6 mana, another one costs 3 mana, another one costs 4 mana, and you have to play 2 2-mana cards, the deck is not going to be fast enough most of the time. The deck was generously placed as a tier 3 deck in early Tempo Storm reports and was generally written off. But it wasn't all bad. Certain parts of the deck were showing potential, and if you got lucky draws, you could win the game very early. So the potential ceiling was there for the deck, but it was time to lift the floor for it. So who was performing well for the deck? Who were we keeping? Sort of like when LeBron would carry all those teams comprised of mediocre players to the finals, Efficient Octobot was a ludicrous card that made pretty much any rogue strategy palatable. The first time Efficient Octobot survived damage, it would reduce the cost of all your cards in hand by 1. It's hard to overstate just how strong this effect is. Emperor Thorson was a strong card in the game a long time ago that enabled some combos. Thorson cost 3 more mana, only discounted the cards at the end of your turn, and was a legendary, so you could only run 1 copy in your deck. You could very easily get 14 or more mana discounted, and when you can do that, even your stupid Lone Shark deck can combo sometimes. You don't even have to play Penflinger or damage the Octobot the turn you play it. At 4 health for 2 mana, there are very few cards in the game, especially if it gets played early on, that could destroy it without triggering Frenzy. The limit at the time was generally 3 damage, like Eye Beam, Drain Soul, Holy Smite, so there was not much anyone could do. And speaking of cards that made any rogue deck run a lot smoother, Secret Passage is a 1 mana epic rogue spell with the effect, replace your hand with 4 cards from your deck. This is one of the best cards ever released, and was a staple in rogue decks for as long as it was in standard. The real big development for the deck was swapping out the V6 engine of Gadgets and Auctioneer with the Voltron nuclear submarine, the power of the sun in the palm of my hand, that is Field Contact. A card that was instantly pegged as incredibly powerful upon reveal. This card enabled Miracle Rogue decks in Forged in the Barrens only a few months earlier at events like Masters Tour or Orgrimmar. Players used cheap battle cries and combo cards to tear through their decks to grab their powerful battle cry cards like Jandis Barov, Mankrik, Kazakis, and Alexstrasza, and repeat their effects with Rogue's bounce effects like Shadowstep and Tenwu. At one point, people realized, wait, we can just keep this shell that draws a bunch of cards and put in the Garrote cards. Just yank out the Wicked Stabs and the Legendaries and put in 2 Shroud of Concealment for draw, and whose stealth component can become quite relevant for protecting Field Contact, 2 Preparation, because no way you want to pay 3 mana for Shroud, and 2 Ethereal Aug Merchant for spell damage and a cheap battle cry. And it started to go crazy. 2 of the top 8 deck lineups at Masters Tour Silver Moon bring the deck, including the overall winner, Jujon Hu. The deck leaps up from the tier 3 and 15th overall deck to tier 2 and 6th overall. We see multiple people hit rank 1 legend over the course of the weeks following the Masters Tour, and during this players refine their 30 card combinations. Kazakis is out. What was once one of the strongest and most played cards in the game is unceremoniously dropped for a different 4-cost card. Guild Trader is in. Just 1 copy is enough since you draw through your whole deck anyway. As stated before, 2 spell damage is enough for 2 Garots to deal 32 damage. Foxy Fraud is out. Foxy Fraud is too expensive. Doesn't really matter since a lot of your combo cards are 1 mana anyway. There's actually a much better source of mana reduction in Efficient Octobot. The deck jumps up to the number 2 overall spot at the start of October, and then jumps up to claim that coveted number 1 overall spot and hold on to it for the next 3 straight weeks. It's a good thing too that these lists had a little time to get refined, because Masters Tour Stormwind is where Garat Rogue took off its glasses, came down the staircase in a pretty dress, and asserted itself as the deck. 7 of the top 8 players bring Garrote Rogue, and the deck is a near constant ban. And it is a joy to watch at the highest level of play. On those rare instances it is banned. While some Hearthstone decks might just play a 2-cost card on turn 2, then a 3-cost card on turn 3, then a 4-cost card on turn 4, and so on, Garat Rogue's abundance of cheap cards and large amounts of card draw will very frequently mean 8 to 10 very cheap playable cards in hand at once. Therefore, players have tons of decisions to make in terms of what and when cards should be played. Players end up playing on the razor's edge very often with this deck. Since so much of the deck is dedicated to draw cards and comboing, players have to get quite creative to defend against the attacks of their opponents. This is where some of the unlikely heroes of the archetype shine. A lot of seemingly unrelated cards blended together very nicely for this deck. For example, Guardian Og Merchant was a fairly overlooked card, good in the lower power level of Arena that became crucial to Garrote Rogue. Divine Shield was big for protecting field contact in case you needed more than one turn to draw, or protecting one of your other minions for attacking your opponent's creatures. Being a one-mana battlecry was crucial for triggering combo and drawing cheaply off field contact. The 1 damage it did was great for triggering Efficient Octobot, and since the deck had so few options for removing opponents' minions, sometimes you had to squeeze out a little crowd control by taking out 1 health enemy minions with this effect. Players were even happy to just have the 2-1 body to contest the board. All this is true for Ethereal Og Merchant as well, plus it was excellent at setting up spell damage for cheap to power up Garat. When combined with Penflinger, the deck reached a critical threshold of 1 damage pings that it could realistically take out a few small enemy minions. But what if the opponent played something big, like a 5, 6, 7 health minion? Well, that is when we look at one of the game's stranger cards. Prize Plunderer is a 1-mana minion with combo, deal 1 damage to a minion for each other card you've played this turn. For a normal deck, maybe this could do 2 or 3 damage, but when you're playing a deck where everything is 1 cost and then reduced to 0 by Efficient Octobot, you can start hitting some pretty crazy numbers. Theoretically, summoning a big 10-10 minion early in the game should pretty easily beat a combo deck without much minion removal like Garat Rogue. But then this cute little guy says, "I won this," and shoots a 12 damage dagger right at your opponent's Fizzy Elemental. Oh, your Ultrasaur can't be targeted by spells or hero powers? Well, too bad, this is neither. If you can't get a big prize plunderer off in time to deal with your opponent's Irebound Brute or whatever, you can just buy yourself enough time with Brain Freeze to where you don't need to deal with your opponent's minions and can just OTK with Garat instead. If you need to buy time against more spell-heavy decks instead of minion-heavy decks, you can just scam a few turns by playing Cult Neophyte and bouncing it with Shadow Step. This is what makes a deck so interesting. When you look at the deck list, you see no hard removal cards, no taunt minions, no healing, and think there's absolutely no way you can survive against any offense from your opponent. But if you play all these little cards in just the right way, you can survive until turn 7 and take away all your opponent's health with Garat. With a new expansion and loads of new cards coming out soon, the Hearthstone Balance team decided it was time to knock the deck down a peg to make room for new strategies. In patch 28.1, Garat was nerfed from shuffling 3 bleeds to only shuffling 2. Now each Garat only did 6 damage, and you needed 3 spell damage to get up to 30 damage. For a deck that already needed very good piloting to squeeze out wins with its squad of tiny 1 damage enforcers, players now had to skirt around attacks even more deftly to set up their game-winning combo. As a result, in the last tier list before the new set released, Rogue fell down a couple spots on the tier list to number 3 overall. Fractured and Alterac Valley brought a whole host of powerful new cards and strategies for Garrote Rogue to contend with. For example, the mechanic of hero cards returned, with each class receiving 1 legendary card that would transform their hero and grant them a new hero power. The other classes received excellent heroes like Cariel or Brukan that would massively boost those opposing strategies, but the best of all of them just so happened to go to Rogue. Shadowcrafter Scabs was immediately recognized as a ludicrous card for Rogue in general, and for what was just the best deck in the format in Garat Rogue. For only 7 mana, you couldn't imagine a more perfect card for the deck. It was like KD joining the Warriors. And I'm not kidding when I say absolutely every part of the card was perfect for the deck. First, it returns all minions to hand, something that used to be a 6 mana spell on its own. Both sides of this effect are fantastic. Bouncing your opponent's minions is huge for a deck that has a hard time dealing with sticky minions or death rattles, and is a great defensive tool. Returning your own minions to hand is great as well, since you have so many great battlecry effects already and you can repeat them or maybe get off another efficient Octobot. Second, it changes your hero power to the ludicrous Sleight of Hand, that for 0 mana, reduces the cost of the next card you play this turn by 2. It's like drawing an extra copy of an upgraded preparation every turn. Being able to work on minions is huge for reducing the cost of things like Field Contact and Guild Trader to finish off the game. In addition, it summons 2 4/2 stealth minions, which are actually no joke. The deck really had no way of dealing good offensive pressure with minions, and potentially 8 damage to face or to trade with minions was huge. Also, important to not overlook the extra 5 armor for a deck that has no healing, and was doing all this for only 7 mana. 7. For comparison, here's some other 7 mana cards. Flame Strike just does 5 damage, blocked by Divine Shield and any big health minions. Cursed Vagrant can barely even compare to summoning the 4/2 Stealth. Giant Tumbleweed, Scar the Catastrophe, Lothar, and of course, Fearsome Doomguard. Needless to say, the card was hugely important for the meta. Upon the release of Fracture and Alterac Valley, Garrote Rogue jumped right back up to the number 1 overall position. With the World Championship only about 10 days after the release of the new cards, the 8 invited players had to quickly prepare their 4 deck lineups to brawl for that sweet $200,000 grand prize. 2 decks were brought by 7 of the 8 players, Garat Rogue and the 1 deck that Garat Rogue had a losing matchup against, Lifesteal OTK Demon Hunter. A deck with a similar game plan to Garrote Rogue, the huge advantage of Demon Hunter was that it had Glide, which could enormously disrupt other decks trying to set up their combos. Although the deck in general was not the strongest, it was a necessity in a meta full of Garat. The third most popular deck was Anaconda Druid, with 5, who was popular due to Celestial Alignment being a counter to Garat Rogue. In addition, the winning deck list included a 1-turn kill combo package as well. We also see 2 Bolner OTK Shaman decks, 2 Owl OTK Warlock decks, and 1 Mizaki OTK Mage deck. A homogenized, highly combo-centric metagame, the landscape of competitive Hearthstone was entirely different from how it looked just 1 year earlier. In the 2020 World Championship, top 8 was full of aggro, mid-range, and control strategies with 2 or 3 OTK decks total. What used to be a fringe, gimmicky playstyle was now the most common play pattern, and the Doomsayers from a few months ago were now validated. The finals were honestly great. They're tight, highly skilled, and the match goes down to the last game. Garat Rogue wins its game, of course, and we end the tournament on the Demon Hunter OTK mirror match. But it's not Hearthstone, or at least Hearthstone as we knew it. The first minion is played on Glory's turn 4, overall turn 8. The second is played on turn 11. The third on turn 12. And then Possessee plays a 32 damage combo from hand on turn 15. In total, a minion attacks 1 time in the whole game. Following the championship, the combo decks got hit with a flurry of nerfs to try to course correct, but the damage had already been done. United in Stormwind was already being called the worst expansion ever. People started leaving an already struggling player base. It felt like Hearthstone would never get back to normal. But as it had for years, Hearthstone marched on. With the worn and weary player base, Hearthstone continued. Because sometimes you make a mistake. Sometimes you can have an idea that you think is great, but it doesn't pan out. In those cases, you can't stop. You can only move forward. Like, hypothetically, you spend a month planning and coordinating a Hearthstone tournament and spend like $200 on it, only for it to become the least viewed video on your channel. Hypothetically, the last thing you should do is just abandon the channel for multiple months after. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to Chundo. I'm serious about that.